Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Iyelli Ichile. Just pardon the red eyes, it's late and I just got home from seeing the new film Harriet, about Harriet Tubman obviously. And I was fortunately invited to a free pre-screening, which was really great. And I just wanted to talk about the film and kind of get ahead of some things because, while I think the film was just masterfully done and just well crafted in general, the discussion, they had like a little dialogue afterwards, was really disturbing. And I didn't get a chance to actually engage in the dialogue because the focus was on the panelists of experts. But I am also an expert about history and about Harriet Tubman in particular. And I think some other voices needed to be heard in that space. So this is my effort to rectify that. And maybe if someone takes something from this, that would be good. I am really close to Harriet Tubman in terms of my spirituality, my worldview, and my path as not just a scholar, but as an African woman, a woman of African descent. And I'll first start by saying that, Cynthia Erivo just did a brilliant job. I mean, just pure excellence. I don't even know how else to say it, even though the phrase Black excellence really annoys me. But she really did. And I know there's a controversy about something she said about Black Americans in the past. And all I'll say about that is, I think for us as Black folks, we really have to find a way to find as much patience and mercy and grace and forgiveness for each other as we find for our oppressors, people who shoot our brothers and sisters, people who, present themselves as our enemies, people who try to block our ability to survive and thrive. Like, we find all the patience in the world, all the forgiveness in the world, all the hugs, So can we find that for Cynthia Erivo? Because I really truly believe that this role for her is redemptive. Like, that's how good it was. So I do think people should see the film. I'll say that. I do think people should see the film with a certain set of, I don't even know. Maybe you shouldn't. But I'm going to tell you what I think. So, one, I think having met several women who have played Harriet Tubman in different capacities. I've met interpreters who have played her in like museum spaces and historical sites. I've even met an actress who played her on a television show. Harriet is her spirit is such a powerful thing that she literally walks with these women. She is with them. She is a part of the process, and she is transformative. They are not the same when they are finished in this role with her, in this role as her. They're not the same. And I feel like even if Cynthia Erivo had some really ignorant thoughts and some divisive thoughts about Black Americans, I think Harriet probably cleared out a lot of that nonsense at this point. And maybe she'll never release a statement apologizing or saying, something else is going on with her now. She thinks differently now. But I feel like it's there. And again, because of my personal engagement, not just with Harriet myself, but with other women who have interacted with her on these levels. So Harriet Tubman shows up in my dissertation research as a really important figure, writing about African women's resistance strategies and how African culture, particularly militaristic culture and African spiritual culture, informs and influences how African women chose to resist slavery. So of course, Harriet Tubman is a part of that. And, there were a lot of really important themes in the film. Spirituality, of course, was one of them. I was really, really glad that they acknowledged the trust that other enslaved Africans had in Harriet's gifts, her spiritual gifts. Like, people put their lives on the line because of the strength of their belief in her gift, right? Her gift to see into spirit, her gift to see the future, her gift to connect and have that direct link with God, as Harriet said, to know which way to go. Even when it seemed like it didn't make sense, they followed it, they trusted it. And that is not necessarily coming from a neatly Christian worldview. What people don't know is that most people of African descent in this country at that time were nominally Christian, right? Christianity was given to them as a means of social control and a vocabulary, a common spiritual vocabulary to speak with one another, to get together, to build community around, to organize themselves. But they weren't grounded in scriptures because they weren't reading it. It was being read to them in bits and pieces and portions. It was skewed, and the language was corrupted. And so most of their spiritual worldview was still deeply tied to Africa, and an African orientation to spirituality, an African orientation to nature and the cosmos and the stars. How did Harriet even know how to navigate? Her parents and her grandmother, who was directly from the continent of Africa, like this is where she acquired the skills, right? She mentions, I think briefly in the film, her grandmother Maud, which is short for modesty, who was brought directly from what people believe to be Ashanti land, which is now Ghana. And that African side of her, her cultural background was not really acknowledged in the film. I mean, they didn't really actually talk much about her early life, her childhood, and all those formative years, So that was, but you can't put it all in one film, right? I think they actually did a really good job packing a whole lot of different stories into, a very short space. So I'll commend them for that. But the childhood would, I think, help us really understand and foreground Harriet Tubman's worldview. Harriet Tubman's ability to signify, right? We can read all of the white women interpreters of Harriet Tubman. We can read, Sarah and Kate, their actual names of white women who have written about her, the main text that people look to. But we will lose, I think, some of the understandings of like how much of a strategist Harriet was, and how Harriet was comfortable not telling everybody everything, the truth about everything she was and everything she was up to. I did like the fact that they understood in the film she was a master of disguise, right? Some of you haven't seen it yet, so I won't spoil that, but that was really, really important, because this is the essence, and this is the beauty, and this is where the survival happens. Like in African culture, like we are people who speak and understand the world in coded, layered ways, in complex ways. Even our rhythms are polyrhythmic and layered, right? And multidimensional. So of course, when we are telling stories and we know we're speaking to more than one audience, the people who know will understand those sub-layers, and the people who we may not trust or who may not have our best interests at heart, we're just not sure about, they get the surface meaning. They get one meaning, and Harriet Tubman was a master at that. But if you don't really think with that mind, and you're not grounded in the culture in that way, you'll miss a lot of what Harriet's saying about herself and what other people know and say about her as well. So I'm saying all that to say the Christian conversation was just severely limiting. Black people and people all around the country called her Moses, but they also called her the charm. Where's that at in the Bible? Harriet Tubman is the charm. They were like, literally, if you keep her with you, like something you could wear, you will be okay. You can't lose. And, so this tells you the African people, enslaved folks, were still using those medicines, still using those what people would call magical elements, but it's just using energetic forces through nature and through the material world to really move energy toward a certain goal. If that goal is protection, if that goal is guidance to navigate something, like we still had that. And that really was the strength of Harriet. And that's what they trusted in Harriet for. So a lot of that was lost in the film. And it was definitely lost in that conversation after the film, which was very Christian centered, which, isn't necessarily completely, irrelevant. Again, she wielded whatever tools she had in her bag to bring as many supporters and resources to herself to do her work as possible. Right? You could say she was a patriot because she led troops in the Civil War, but that's you not understanding Harriet, right? Harriet said, there's a potential for me to free hundreds of black people by putting on this blue uniform and getting these black men some guns and allowing them to kill their former enslavers. I'm about that life, right? So, it had nothing to do with the American flag, y'all. But some people could read her that way, right? Some people would like to read her that way, but what does that do for us? And that's what Black folks really need to approach any piece of art. Certainly art that has a political meaning in a certain time, in our time. We have to ask of this art, like, what does this mean for us? Who are the artists speaking to when in this presentation? I hope, and I would like to think that this film, which is directed by Casey Lemons, that it is layered and it's signifying, and there is a message for maybe mainstream America so they can sell some tickets, and then there are also these other layers of meaning for people who wish to look deeper and who have the capacity to do so, right? So for instance, there was a conversation about the spirituals, and I'm so glad they figured out that Harriet could sing and that she had a softer side, and she wasn't just this like mean-faced, mannish, hulking person. She was like a little 5-foot woman with love in her heart, and with femininity, and with dimensions, just different facets. And she used that beautiful voice of hers to call people to come out and follow her to freedom, so she could remain in hiding while calling them. And that, the conversation was about, how the spirituals were used because they allow people to, I don't know, find their faith. And then they came out the slave cabins. And I'm like, but you completely missed the fact that there are coded messages in the songs as well. So yeah, of course, the vibrational quality, the beauty, the power in her voice, it did call. It did do something. But there's also like the farewell song she sings to her mother, because she can't walk out there on the field where they're, tending the field and say, "Hey mom, I'm out. Bye. Let me get you a hug and kiss." Like, she had to sing that farewell song. So there was a message of farewell, and the mother and all the other people knew what this meant because of the actual language, like the actual intellectual process was happening. So we have to acknowledge that as well. And that was missed in the conversation. Harriet Tubman's Ashanti roots were known and well acknowledged by the people she lived with, people in her community. They were like, because she has that Ashanti blood, like, her dreams matter. Like, we got to pay attention to those things, her traumatic brain injury was not seen among these Africans as a weakness, as a liability. They trusted it. They actually saw this as an asset. This was an advantage that they had, because Harriet, when she went out in those spells, was downloading all that information and receiving the directions for where to go. And I think that is, again, Harriet wielding all of the tools. If you just looking at like Harriet and her relationship to Jesus through your understanding of a book, then you've missed at least half of the story. People trusted Harriet enough to take their babies to freedom, and that was just unheard of on the Underground Railroad, because babies cry. Her herbal knowledge was used to keep these babies quiet. Her herbal knowledge was used in the Civil War to help heal soldiers, and fight against these epidemics that would break out in these encampments. And that you could never understand how she never got sick. But this is a culturally based knowledge system that she was born into, that we don't get to really get to hear about. One of the critiques that I thought was really, really good and really, really important about the film, that another brother in the audience brought up, was the emphasis on the Black snitch, right? Again, they can't tell the whole story, but choices were made. The people who made this film are the ones who get to look at all of their knowledge of Harriet's history, Harriet's story, and choose what to highlight, what to underline, what to put in, what to leave out. We have not one, not two, but we have like at least 3 Black snitches in this film. And then it also portrays her main arch nemesis, like her biggest enemy, as a Black man. And that's just absurd. And so a choice was made, and thinking people should ask why. Why was that choice made? You've got thousands of slaveholders. You've got a bevy of slave catchers who were salivating to try to get Harriet, to catch her and get that reward money for her. you focus on a black man, and he's in this brutal scene killing a black woman, another black woman. So yeah, that was, and then it leads to questions of like why black men are portrayed in a certain way or not portrayed in a certain way as particularly strong. And not even just like, badasses, like why were the black men not physically strong and physically protective all the time, but really just why did the black men not seem to have as much courage and fortitude as, many of the women in the film, particularly Harriet, of course. Well, we know the film is about Harriet, right? She is the main character. But my critique isn't even just that black men were made to look in some ways weak. I think my issue is that Harriet Tubman, like, it's the Hollywood model, but it's just the general kind of Western hero idea that many of us have bought into, which is like we have to focus on that one person, like that one hero. It's just Harriet. She was just so different from everybody else, just so singular, so unique, so special. So then our next question is, well, where is our Harriet today? We got to wait on a Harriet to show up. We got to find that next black person who's going to lead us to freedom. And the Harriet Tubman was not the only badass on these trips, on these railroad trips, on the Underground Railroad. She was not the only conductor. And many of her passengers also carried guns. She wasn't the only one with guns. She wasn't the only one willing to, like, not just die for freedom, but kill for freedom. Like the stories I've read, and, I have made the choice to teach at a community college for a lot of really important reasons, as, for me as an educator of people, students of color, particularly African students of a certain background. But so I'm not at one of these well-funded, universities with a research budget and a research team and grad students who can kind of like spend a ton of time and money traveling and doing all this deep research about everything related to Harriet. My strength is in interpretation. That's what I do. And so I read books and I reread books, and I look at some archival materials that I can access, and I reread those, and I read between the lines, and I try to put a realistic, culturally grounded interpretation to those things so we can uncover more of the story that even some historians miss. Like, what are their blind spots, right? And I think with Harriet, like, we present her as this singular hero because that's the cultural orientation of like the mainstream society. That's a Eurocentric way of looking at things. Harriet Tubman was one of many. Everybody was heroic. Like, the stories are about her and, even other young women packing pistols and, standing down slave catchers, like she was embedded in a community of courageous people. They all went out there just ready to like throw down and survive and tough it out. The movie kind of presents everybody else as like these shivering, sniveling, weaklings who just needed her guidance so bad. And I'm just like, please give the black folks some dignity. The enslaved Africans had some dignity. She wasn't the only one, and, having dignity and pride and confidence could get you killed. But, but there were many, many more of us who were determined to have that for ourselves and to display that. So I think that's important, that Harriet Tubman saw herself as a part of a collective. She was propped up by a lot of people because she did have a unique positioning within that movement, within that particular system, that network. But Harriet Tubman will be the first one to tell you stories about how she and a whole other group of black women, played tug of war with some officers of the state trying to literally pull this black man out of their clutches, literally in the streets, and taking blows to the head and everything, trying to pull this black man away from them so they can get him away to freedom, like in broad daylight, in front of a courthouse, so yeah, so there's that Harriet and them. So I think that's the thing. I wanted to see like Harriet and them. You know what I mean? And it was like Harriet and those like raggedy, scared folks, So, and I know that's a gross exaggeration. But, the men in her life, her father was her source of strength. Her father trained her. Her father had her out there learning how to like chop timber, and learn again how to navigate and read stars, and it wasn't just kind of like this last minute, hey, here you go, like on the fly. Like we again don't really acknowledge like this is years and years of relationship building, years and years of training that prepared her. Yes, she prayed every day for strength to get free and to fight, but she was also trained and given some skills, a particular set of skills that came in handy. And I think the film did a lot to humanize her. It gave her, again, a sense of love and passion and femininity. But I think in some ways the film robbed the other characters of their due at the same time, if that makes sense. So I wanted to talk about that cultural aspect. I did like the way the film presented masks and masking, like the Reverend Green, and how he preached about being obedient slaves. But in the end, you really see that behind that mask of the happy, subservient Black preacher slave, you see like, a rebel who is fighting back against the system in whatever way he can by helping fugitives, helping enslaved Africans get out of it. He represents the church, but there's also kind of this other aspect to him that is, again, showing you the ways in which Black folks kind of had that other belief beneath the scriptures, that other ethic, that other set of values that maybe ran parallel even to their Christianity, their imposed Christianity, but was definitely still there and definitely instrumental in them getting free. I like that they presented the Blackjacks. There's so much more that needs to be said about maritime Black history, like Black history on the water, and like the role of Black folks who worked on these ships and at these docks, transferring information back and forth. Like this was literally like the Instagram and the telephone and, how we communicated, and the brilliance of how that worked cannot be, I think we really haven't fully studied that yet. I mean, even pirates, like, I don't just study like slavery in America, the United States. I study slavery throughout. So I study diaspora. So I study the Caribbean and South America and all these other places in which the, people of African descent were enslaved. And like, pirates work for pay. So they were, the relationship even between pirates on the ocean, transferring Black people here and there and everywhere. And, just some amazing stories about Black folks on the water that we really need to think about, but most of us don't even think Black folks swim. So, yeah. What else can I say? I like that the film brought out the idea that when people run, there are still those left behind, and that running affects everybody. And that is something people had to think about and struggle with, and that it wasn't just easy to run away. Sometimes we would like to be like, I'd have hurt somebody. I'd have been out. They'd have killed me. I love hearing that. My students say stuff like that all the time, and it's wonderful that there's that spirit among them. But, people had to consider children. People were tortured and manipulated in all kinds of ways. Imagine like someone knowing your worst case scenario and using that against you. Like, I will remove you from your children, like that was constant. That was literally how the system worked. And, so, a lot of people were like mad at Harriet's sister, but, I'm mad that there were so many Black snitches in the film, but, I think we need to, again, humanize these people and understand the predicament that they were put in as human beings. I was talking to my students the other day about lynching and how, lynching affects communities. Lynching doesn't just affect that one person. It affects their family. People don't think about the aftermath. When a Black man is lynched, who is left at home? It is the wife. It is the elders. It is the babies. The lynch mobs don't just stop there. They now know that there's a house full of vulnerables, and they go there. They rob the house. They rape the wife. They beat the children. They burn the thing down, They drag the body parts of the lynch victim through the streets and use it to terrorize other Black neighborhoods. There's so much comprehensive terror that happens around these incidents. And so whenever a Black person is extricated from an environment, whenever they leave a home or leave a family or leave a community to be elsewhere, whether by choice or by force, there's always the people behind that are affected by it one way or another. So we need to also acknowledge that. What else will I say? Prayer is important. I hope people noticed that at the beginning, Harriet prayed. She ran to that tree and prayed that if her master couldn't fix his heart, and just change his thinking about, letting her and her siblings be free according to their legal right that they had just presented to him. If he couldn't change his mind on that, just kill him, Lord, kill him. Like, that was her prayer. She said it real quick at the tree. And then the next day he was dead. That's a real story. And again, Harriet prayed at a tree. There was definitely a whole pastor and definitely a whole little church for black folks. She ran to the tree to pray. Now, what does that tell you? What do trees mean for people who are of indigenous, nature-based faiths that are much more ancient than the Christian stuff we do? What does a tree mean? What does a tree mean in terms of ancestral spirits, right? I hope people raise those questions. Why she went to the tree instead of like Pastor Green and, say, pray with me? She didn't want to go when her dad said pray with him. She was like, I don't want to pray with that guy. He's a coon, She found out later to trust her father and trust her instincts. But her prayers worked, guys. She spiritually killed that dude. And she told the story to her interpreters, people who wrote down her story. She told them to in a really funny way. And, she was really glib and she had all kinds of interesting, clever ways of spinning a tale. But ultimately, she killed that man spiritually and presented it in a way that people, just took all the fangs out. You don't even realize what she's telling you. That's the signifying. You know what I mean? Like, people think Harriet had that gun for nothing, just to threaten black people with it. Harriet had that gun because Harriet was very clear that she was ready to not just die, but kill for freedom. I believe Harriet had bodies. Harriet caught a body about a week ago. You know what I mean? Harriet caught some bodies. If she was willing to kill somebody spiritually, I don't put it past her to get her hands dirty physically. I don't. And I feel like if we can imagine the grueling, crazy things she must have encountered in these missions, all these several missions she took into slavery to bring more and more and more folks out, like what she had to do, the tough choices she had to make, how much dirt she had to crawl through to get those people out. There's no way she made it without, taking some life. So I don't have all the receipts. Again, I don't have a research team and I don't have ability to prove that because Harriet was a strategist. She's not going to tell nobody. She's not going to tell nobody that. She's going to tell this white woman abolitionist that she killed white people, that she killed white men, slave catchers, that she, you know what I mean? She certainly handled some during the Civil War. We think it's okay and we think it's plausible that she did that under, the U.S. Army, but not, in the name of the freedom of her people, which she valued way more. Okay, sure. Y'all keep believing that. And I'm going to know the Harriet that I know. Harriet's humor, I think, was one of the major things that I missed in the movie. I would love to see someone present a Harriet that laughs and cracks jokes because her sense of humor actually got her out of some really sticky situations with people. And it was a way to cheer people up when they got scared and distract them from like the whatever crazy thing was about to happen next. And again, it adds to the human element and the dimensionality of Harriet. I think that's really, really important. The film did have some comic relief, though. I think some of it was okay, but I really feel like it was gratuitous, like the way they used her father for comic relief kind of more than a few times. It was like, okay, we get it. I didn't want us to be laughing at her father. Like, I wanted us to really understand him on a deep level. And so that was unfortunate. I didn't think that was tasteful. I think it was a cop-out. I think it was a way of it was a statement. It was like, we think American audiences are emotionally immature and unable to stay in this zone with us all the way through. So we need a light moment because they're children and we need to like relieve them of their duty to like really process this. So, I find stuff like that insulting, but that's just me. You ain't got to agree with that. But yeah, Harriet Tubman did have a sense of humor. She loved storytelling. When she was an old lady, in this home that she built to like house people, to like, it was like a halfway house or like a rehabilitation center for formerly enslaved people, y'all. She took care of her parents and elders and her relations, but also like all kinds of other people. She would just like get out her little wheelchair and like crawl on the ground and like demonstrate how she did this mission and that mission. I mean, she was just she was spunky. She was sprightly and moved around a lot and just super, super energetic, People said it was almost as if she was kind of trying to keep herself from conking out sometimes. So she's just like super, super high energy, just a little dynamo, and that's how I imagine her. So we don't get that. She's still kind of one of the more serious portrayals of Harriet, very like, follow me, you gonna follow me, and she did have the ability to like switch it up and go from smiling and laughing and joking to like, all right, tighten up, so she did have that. But I would like just me to see more of the other side, because it wouldn't have been used as comic relief so much as it would have been used as a way to understand her more as a woman. What is the other point I wanted to make before I leave you alone? I've been talking for 30 minutes, 31 minutes. I guess that, Harriet did find love again. And it was kind of like, I don't even know, maybe they mentioned it in like the writing at the end of the film. But I think that would have been a really redemptive portrayal of a Black man in the film if they had talked about Charles Davis. Was it Nelson Charles Davis or Nelson Charles? Y'all, it's late. She met a young man who was a Civil War veteran like herself, and she married him, and they ran that house together. They cared for their community together, and that's a story in and of itself. So I think, anyway, I think, they could have done a better job of portraying our relationships with each other in that film. Black male and female relationships with each other. They had a long way to go to like improving the nature of those relationships. We always are depicted as kind of just being natural enemies of each other. And that's the wrong direction, right? It's kind of like Black woman, your biggest doubter is going to be a Black man. Your biggest opponent is going to be a Black man. Who has time for that? We have to be real that sometimes patriarchy is a problem, and sometimes our brothers have bought into this patriarchy stuff, but that there is hope, and we do have examples of when it works between us. Can we just look at some more of that? Can we just look at some examples so we can see how to do that? Harriet figured out how to do that. So it was a missed opportunity. I'll just leave it there. It's a missed opportunity. All in all, the conversation at the theater ended with someone going on a rant about Botham Jean and how we need to dig into our Christian forgivingness as Black people. And I was so disturbed because, Harriet did allow her main slave-holding tormentor, this young man, to live. She shot off some fingers and then wasted that last bullet in the air and let him live to fight again in the Civil War. And it was merciful and all that other stuff. And, that was supposed to be evidence of her Christian faith and stuff like that, her Christian values. And I'm like, first of all, I don't know if it happened that way, but okay. And then two, I think this is the danger of hugs, I know we can't judge people and what they do in their hour of grief, although I have much judgment for that judge. I don't know what that sister was doing, but the brother hugging and the father saying he wanted to befriend his son's killer, all that stuff is, we cannot tell them how to behave in times of grief. Grief makes people do crazy things that we can't understand. But what it does beyond that, because it does have wider implications for the rest of us, is it means that we are making statements about how we should respond when our crisis happens, and it will. Being here is being in a perpetual state of crisis. So when that crisis happens to us, are we supposed to hug too? You know what I mean? What is the example that is set? Why is it played over and over and over again ad nauseum in the media? that moment, right? Harriet Tubman showing just like unreasonable mercy to this white slaveholding guy is a product of that same, I think, mode of thinking. And we have to, in order to prove our humanity, we have to show that we are nonviolent, as opposed to proving our humanity by saying we are people who believe we deserve real justice. So, another missed opportunity. These are my thoughts. Again, support Black filmmakers, support Black actors. Go see the film so they can get some monies and we can have more of these films and get better and better and better at this. But I'll stop there, and I hope you are able to think critically and form your own opinions for yourself. And I'd love to engage with you guys about those things online. I'll see you in the digital or in the physical if you round my way.